Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to a brand new video. Today's podcast episode is going to be a short interview with Sam, or Snowythedogphotography, that I had a couple of months ago now, around the start of his summer holidays, that kind of thing. And it's been an interesting kind of development that he's had since then. But I still think there's a lot of value in this conversation. I think there's a lot of merit, and I think it was really interesting for me to talk to someone who has kind of come up and started afresh and kind of started the idea of content creation, but also has been someone that has consumed my content. So without further ado, I'll let Sam talk a little bit more about who he is and what he does and what he currently does and where he wants to go. But yeah, enjoy this interview, and thank you so much for joining me once again this week, and I'll see you very, very soon.
All right then. So my name is Sam. My Instagram handle is Snowythedogphotography, and I am a I'm a 22-year-old sort of TV and film student living in Salisbury. I've just completed the first year of my education on the subject, and my passion lies in content creation, whether that's photos, videos, like sort of YouTube blogs, anything that I can make that helps enhance my understanding of like using cameras and creating content, I'll be doing it.
No, definitely. I think for me, I think that this is an interesting podcast because I'm sure I'll get some questions, because before I've been like, if you're not in business, then we can't have a conversation, right? But I think for me it's going to be interesting because when you reached out about coming on, I was like, okay, well, I can see a different avenue here, of different thing to explore. So how did you find your first year of studying? Because just to give either you or people who are listening who don't know, I don't actually have an official qualification. I didn't go the official route to learn filmmaking, so to speak. So it's an interesting, from my perspective anyway, it'd be interesting to hear kind of how what that process is like, because I have a college education, but it's in game development, so it's similar, but it's not, if that makes sense.
No, that does make sense. That does make sense. And on the course, games development and TV and film they're very close departments, and we're constantly sort of working with one another just because of the like working with the Adobe package and using those things. The first year of the course really is just a kind of catch-all. This is a load of different stuff that you'll encounter within the industry, and here's the basic codes and conventions of these things. So like we looked at music videos, we looked at different film theorists and different film theories. You do like sort of talking head interviews. It's a really catch-all, like these are all sorts of stuff that you can be doing, where it's the first year and it's sort of open for anyone to join. It's meant to be like a sort of dip your toe in, see whether or not this is the type of thing you'd be interested in. And then the second year, that's when more specifics are explored, like lighting and all that sort of stuff.
No, definitely. I think that's definitely a good approach to have. I just think for me it was kind of a my background's been in game development and creating gaming content for 7-8 years. Before I went into photography and then into filmmaking more traditionally. In that respect, doing corporate videos and event videos and that kind of thing. So for me, I think it's definitely a space that's definitely very, very, very talented. There's a lot of talented people in it, and there's also a lot of new people coming into it now, which is really nice for me to see, because it's funny. And I wanted to bring this up with you because I obviously consumed a little bit of your content before this, because I wanted to prep to sort of get to know where you are and what you are in that respect as well. But it's funny because I saw a lot of when I look back at some of my early vlogs and my early content and my early, me just fucking around with creating content, and me, and just learning, really, really learning and experimenting. I saw a lot of what I did then, back in 2018 and late 2017, in what you're doing now and in what you've been doing in the last, say, I want to say 3 months, but feel free to correct me. 3-4 months. I definitely saw there was that kind of spark, and I think that's really, really important, because there's one thing to create content, but I think that there needs to be a passion in it, and there needs to be, you may not start with like stunning, and hopefully I can be a testament to this, but stunning work, in the respect to it's a Hollywood movie, kind of style. But no, I mean, no one starts that, and no one I think will expect that at the start. But I think the ideas and the passion that you have for it are very important, and if they're not there, then I think that people won't necessarily put the hard graft in, I guess is the term, to really take from where you are now to closer to where I am, in that respect. So it's interesting to see that there's now a new set of content creators coming out, especially in the Salisbury area as well, which I think is only beneficial for the city overall as well.
I mean, for me, it's this isn't the first time that I've actually tried to get into photography and filmmaking. I did it when I was 18, but back then I can only talk about sort of my personal experience, as much as I might suspect that other people might feel the same way. Back when I first tried to do it, there was an internal sort of ambivalence as to whether or not it was something that I wanted to do. Being in the early life stages, from my experience, I sort of learned what I didn't want to do, and then sort of progressed into more, well, I know I don't want to do that, so what about this? And where, I'm at the beginning of my journey, there's just a lot of the people on the course, I see passion within them, and I see a drive for them to create stuff, and some real talent, some really incredible talent. But I also notice an ambivalence within them as to whether or not they want to pursue it, because they're unsure as to whether or not they want to commit to a certain path. I think that being young is to be like this raw ball of potential, where you can be anything, and you are literally told your whole life you can be anything. And to pick a specific path to follow, it doesn't have to be for the rest of your life. It doesn't have to be, for the next 6 months, but just to pick a path is kind of goes against being that raw ball of potential, because you've got to refine that and go through the process of refining it until you get to something of substance, and where you can use the passion and apply it to the work without, I don't know how to put it, without the sort of the self-doubt over whether or not it's something that you want to be spending your time doing.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. But from someone who's been doing it a couple of years ahead of you, that the self-doubt never goes away. Right? Like that I can tell you now, I'm just over 3 years deep in the respect of doing it commercially, and the self-doubt's still there. Right? I still double check, I still triple check, I still get stressed, I still get worried, I still get have days where I get really upset about the quality of my work and this and that. And I think it's really important for anyone who's looking to especially make a living out of being a creative, which the odds are stacked against you. I hate to break this to you, anyone listening, but the odds are stacked against you in doing it.
Of course.
It's hard. It is very hard. And especially with COVID and everything else going on in the world at the moment as well, it's even harder, right? It's taking a already difficult thing to do and making it even harder. But by no means does that mean you can't do it. By no means does that mean you shouldn't do it. I think that you have to be aware that it's going to be long hours. It's going to be, if you're expecting to work 40, 50-hour weeks every week to build something like Brunton Media or whatever, an agency or content creation agency or whatever, then you're going to have to put in 80 hours, 100 hours plus a week every week for a long period of time before you can start pulling it back. Depending on the scale in which you're trying to grow to, and etc. But I think it's important thing to understand at a base level, to understand that it is hard, one, and two, there's actually a lot more understanding of business and how business and how content creation actually works to serve business than it is actually about content creation. Go on. No, go on.
I think you've made a very interesting point there about it is not easy. Tying that into what I was saying around an internal ambivalence. If you haven't already solved that ambivalence within yourself and go, no, I'm prepared to walk this path no matter what difficulties I face, it's a lot easier to get deterred by potential roadblocks that you might run into. I think, like just from listening to your podcast, and just something that I picked up was, if you want it to work, you have to consistently put out high quality content. And I think the consistency is really important. I do a photo a day, no matter what, on my Instagram, just to show that I'm constantly trying to improve, constantly trying to develop my craft. And it's not easy to be consistent because, like you said, it's the 80-hour week. It's the being prepared to sacrifice your time to hopefully in a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, reap the benefits of it. It's looking more at what you can build for yourself in the long term rather than the sort of short term, like, oh, that's done for today, I'll worry about that tomorrow. You've got to almost play it like chess and try and have your moves ahead planned out.
Oh no, definitely. I mean, especially when you're looking to as you go further into less spur of the moment videos, which I still have, but it's more of a structured. Right now, I have a podcast going out every Monday. I have a YouTube video going out every Wednesday. Etc. That's the routine, right? So now it's very structured, right? Yeah. I need to be, on average, I try and be a week to a week and a half ahead. Like today alone, I was editing a podcast that won't go out for another 2 weeks. At the time of filming, but. The only reason why I'm able to have consistent content come out, even if I get busy, is because I've already prepped 2 weeks ahead, or 3 weeks ahead, or 4 weeks ahead. In that respect as well. So it's allowed me to sort of continually have stuff going out, no matter what happens with whether I've got busy with client work or whatever, or whether I want to take a couple of days off or etc. I'm now at a point where I can do that because I have enough of the foundations in place where I've already, like, for example, I could not work for a week and I would still have 2 videos go out like a week, right? Because they're already done. They're good to go. They're good to go right now, right? So like next week's set's already good to go, for example, right? But I think an interesting answer for me anyway. I'm not sure how the people who listen to the podcast will find it, but for me, I think it's interesting to hear from your side as a consumer of my content, firstly, how long have you roughly been consuming, firstly, and then secondly, how have you found it from a consumer's perspective? Because I rarely get to have an actual longer form conversation about my content in the respect to, because I can sit here and say, oh, this is why you should be doing this is how you should be doing this is why this is important. But for me, it's a big difference, because hearing it from someone who consumes my content and has actually taken value from my content is very, very valuable for me, because it's kind of a validation to know that what I'm doing is actually right. Because I can theorize until tomorrow, but that doesn't mean in reality that it's going to work, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think the first time that I interacted with your content, it was actually through some of the sort of bottom-up advertising that you do, where you actually gave me some feedback on some of my work. And, it's the natural curiosity. It's like, oh, who's this person? And then you click on their profile. And I sort of thought to myself at the time, wow, that's pretty cool. Like somebody who's in the field that I'm looking to get into is offering feedback and engaging with people at the ground level and trying to share what they might have found out, you know, with somebody who's very early on, that is a very attractive attitude in business and in life, you know, to give back to others. And so, you know, it's the type of thing where the consistency again, like I pretty much every single day will watch your stories on Instagram, and I know what I'm going to see there. It's you talking about the behind the scenes. This is what you're working on at the moment. And it's the consistency again, but it's also an engagement with people on a personal level, which really separates, you know, like separates the sort of content you're putting out to maybe that something else is. And the reason why I think that your content has value is because there are a million videos online of people reviewing camera gear. You know, there are people in the field who do that, and I enjoy watching the videos and that sort of stuff. But if I am looking as a creator to, you know, find some tried and tested strategies on how I'm going to gain an audience, and a sustainable audience as well, not just an audience that will stay for 5 minutes and get bored, but a sustainable audience, how I'm going to pursue my passion and collaborate with a local community to mutually benefit and all those sorts of things, that is a gap in the market, because nobody, at least in my experience, like I said, I can only speak from my experience, but nobody is actually discussing how you and your community can work together to not only raise your public profile, but to be an active community member and make a positive impact on the environment that you're in. So for me, that is why that's why I even engaged with this podcast. Do you know what I mean? When I replied to you and I said, "Hey, I'll come on," because it's a positive thing to be a part of, and that to me is what shines through from your content.
No, I appreciate that, but you know, for me, whenever I produce a piece of content, I always think, how is it valuable, right? And how is it going to be valuable for the person who stumbles upon it? Because the reality of the fact is, if you want to build a community or an audience or whatever, you know, it's going to be consistent. You're going to get one person a day for, you know, maybe one or two a day or whatever, you know, and then there'll be days where you earn none or you lose a few or whatever, you know, in that respect. But it goes back to what I was saying earlier about it is hard work, right? You know, it's this constant, and I feel a lot of the time, especially nowadays, that I'm trying to spin way too many plates, and I'm sure if you're not there, you will be. But by your reaction, it seems like you already relate.
Yeah.
In that respect, because I think it's important, but for me, it's something which I always question to myself: am I over pushing myself? Right? You know, am I stretching myself too thin, or etc. But and then it's this constant repeat, and I keep going around in the circle of like, am I? And then I just do it anyway, right? And it's just for me, I just think that, you know, I mean, it's very, very glad to hear that validation from you know, you and someone who really consumes my content, is because for me, I think that Salisbury as a whole, specifically, and I can only mainly talk about Salisbury here because, you know, I'm one of the main people in Salisbury who creates content. But you know, for me, it's definitely a community city, you know, from a Salisbury Indies perspective, but also a just creator's perspective. You know, every photographer in most cases, if you have been operating or being around taking photos, even if you're a hobbyist for probably 6 months to a year, the likelihood that you know who actually operates professionally is pretty high, right? Especially if you operate professionally. If you operate professionally, you will meet the same faces, you know, 3 out of 6 events a year. You know, like,
absolutely,
there's only
that's
there's only like 4 or 5 people who really shoot high end professionally or high end quote unquote professionally, because that's very subjective, right? Your definition of high end is up to the client, right? But you know, there is only certain people who are obviously good enough to be able to do it part time or full time, because they're just around all the time.
You're not going to remember the faces that pop up and you never see again, but you're going to remember the people who are consistently at the same events and who are always engaging with it. And you know, there's you, there's Chris Wynn Photography. They're just people that I've connected with through Instagram, through posting regularly in the Salisbury area, and I don't remember the people who've posted once and then, disappeared, but the people who are, like we've talked about, consistently posting, consistently putting themselves out there, you become familiar with these people, because although you might be on separate journeys, you're walking a similar path, and as a result there are ways in which you can support each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, something which I think COVID's just highlighted is that there needs to be like a community spirit in the respect to, specifically the Salisbury community, but it could be anywhere. Replace the word Salisbury with any city in the country. There's no reason to say that you can't be, if there isn't a community of creators or a community of photographers or community of videographers or whatever, that is creating. If you want one, make one.
Yeah.
Right? Or be the change. Like I say a lot, be the change you want in the world. Right? Because no one else is going to necessarily be that change, right? If you want to make sure, or you want to make or have a situation where there is a following for video and people understand why video is important and this and that, then you need to go and prove to the world that video is important, and this is why video is important, and this is why video is a good medium to invest in, and this is why video is good, and why there should be a demand for video content. And then the same with photos, and the same with audio, and the same with any content that you talk about. In that respect, have you moving briefly back to what you do as well, for those who don't know, because I think a percentage won't. Firstly, what do you do? I'll let you take that wherever you want.
Yep.
But and then say in 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years, wherever, where do you then want to be?
Well, it's a very interesting question. Like I said, being young, I could be anything, and at the moment I'm trying to switch from that energy of I could be anything and become more specific about my goals, because I think if you're vague about something, it will never happen. So what I do, if you like, I've got my Instagram, like I mentioned earlier, and I post daily on there photos that I take, and I use that to display my style, but also, as we've spoken about, be active in the community, have people familiar with the name, so if they think, oh, I want some photos taken of my girlfriend or my car or something like that, they've got my name in the back of their mind. Also, as a content creator, I put things up on my YouTube channel, which is under the same name, and that is more developing the cinematography side of things. And all of the stuff that I'm doing at the moment, I would say the key difference is that I'm doing it for myself. I am trying to make as much as possible, to make as many mistakes as possible, so in which I can learn from them. I quite often find that at the end of a project, I want to go back and redo it because I feel I could do it better, but I wouldn't be able to do that if I hadn't first completed the project. So all of the photos that I put on my Instagram, all of the content that I put on my YouTube, it is all focused on me being able to improve, and just me practice as much as possible, just practice, and already that's made a big change to my work. We've touched on a little bit about COVID and how that's impacted things. Obviously, college got shut down, so I had to sort of take my education into my own hands, and make sure that I was still interacting with and providing myself opportunities for growth, because I can't, I would be on summer holidays anyway now, so I need to make sure I'm always improving. 6 months to a year, I'm going to be doing the second year of the course in September. I'm going to be then, after that year, progressing to university to follow a film production course. And for me, all the time that I'm doing these things, all the time that I'm in education, sort of working on myself, I also hope to be sort of paralleling that with my own work, and like I said, developing myself just through practice. So I sort of plan to pursue the education angle, but also pursue my self-education angle of just creating and putting stuff out. You know, me and my younger brother, we've both, you know, like I spoke about earlier, we both sort of solved that internal ambivalence within ourselves, and we are sort of locked on content creation, you know, photography and videography, and we're just going to follow that and go for it because we love it. You know, it just so happens to be that our dad's a sort of part-time photographer, and it's something that I I don't know how to describe it. It's something that uh, gives me a sense of purpose, which is a big motivator when it comes to doing anything. You know, is the internal gun.
Oh yeah, exactly. I mean, being fulfilled overall, like being fulfilled and overall, like like people ask, how do you work the hours you work? Right, because maybe you can comment on this, because I don't think people, I don't think some people anyway that would consume this podcast necessarily understand that how much I do work, right? And I don't want to make this podcast about me, right? But like, I also just want to premise that, but not saying it's me. And I'll come on to the next bit I was thinking about while you were going on about uni, because for me I've had this kind of conflict. I think that for me, university wise, is like I can get why certain jobs you will want to go to uni, right? And by no means just to premise this, I don't want to like say you shouldn't go to uni, right? That's your decision to make, and you should make that decision completely independently of anyone else. But for just my opinion of uni as a concept, I think for filmmaking specifically, if you're looking to go into a more traditional route of I want to create a Hollywood film, then I can see why uni would be beneficial. However, I think that, to be honest, in reality, the concept of making a living out of being a Hollywood producer or Hollywood DP or Hollywood camera operator or whatever is actually very, 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 very hard. And especially nowadays, I think it's going to become even harder, because unless you've got, like, it's about knowing someone who knows someone, right? And I think that personally for me, you know, the reason why, because people ask me all the time, oh, why didn't you go to uni? Why didn't you go to college? Why didn't you go this and that? And I was thinking, well, yeah, I could, but the thing is, I don't need a structured motivation to be motivated to learn and to be motivated to push myself to get better. I just created and 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 created, and then continued, right? And that's what I'm still doing now. And eventually, you'll kind of, especially if you're looking to do it from a more commercial, you know, you want to actually do it as a living perspective, which you may not, but I think that you do. You know, I think that I think that uni, you're kind of, it's one of those things where in some ways I think you shoot yourself in your foot just because you want that piece of paper. But I don't think, I wouldn't want to say that the piece of paper isn't important, because of course it is, and it is good, but it's kind of lost the value it had. So say, for example, we were like, I don't know, like 30, 40 years ago, and you had a Pacific University education in film, that would probably be a lot more beneficial for you then than it is now. Because the main point I'm getting at here is, I would personally think and do what I did when I got to the point of college, where I was like, I got to the end of college, I had to make a decision where I was going to go into further education or whether I was going to get a job, right? You know, a part-time job or whatever it was. And I was like, well, I asked myself, am I internally motivated for every day for me to learn probably the same amount or more than I would do in a university education, right? Because in our trade, I would say, in my experience at least, it's about, can you do the job? It's not about what paper do you have, right? If you can do the job and your product is good and your service is good and you're you're good at video, that doesn't mean for a second that you can't be better at video. But if you're good at video, then I would say you will be able to do it without a university education. Now, of course, for the right person, a university education would be probably a good idea, right? But I think it has to come back. It's a very personal decision. That's I think the point.
I agree with everything that you've just said, and it is for all of those reasons that I've actually made this decision to go to university. I can feel my 18-year-old self shivering at the thought of it. But really, like you said, university in terms of film production, cinematography, anything like that, is a very traditional route. You know, you go to college, you go to university, you become a runner, you get people coffee for 3 years, and then you like sort of uh, worship the feet of the masters and try and gain experience that way. I I don't want to do that. I want to go to university to learn as much of that traditional mode of creating as possible, so then I can take the benefits that come with that, you know, sort of the tried and tested format of that, and then sort of incorporate that with what I've learned alongside my own education and choose a different path. And I think this is something that, you know, I young people don't really talk about it enough. You know, I've noticed a lot of my friends, you know, I'm 22, so most of my friends have been in university for years now, and I don't know whether it would be this year or next year that they'd be heading out and getting jobs, but there's an element I perceived when it came to school, uni, whatever, of mindlessness, of I'll do it because it's the next thing to do, not because it's a conscious decision they've made because of specific benefits that they'll get out of it. I think it's just some people who go to university go because they feel it's just the natural progression of their education. I've I have spent quite a while thinking about the pros and cons, you know, the debt and the what I could potentially learn from it. And like I said, I plan to learn as much of that traditional form of creating as possible, and then take the benefits from that and leave the shortfalls, and then try and incorporate that into the way that I create. Because like I said, I don't want to be a runner for 3 years. Do you know what I mean? Like having no life. And you know, I already work. I work about 25 hours a week in a local business here, and I try to do that alongside college, and as well as alongside creating in my own time. Like I've had experience within my life of what it feels like to never have any time to stop and smell the roses, if you like. And so I am more than 100% prepared to sacrifice the now to get the future that I want. But part of that future is having space for myself and time for myself in which I can relax and actually enjoy the benefits of being alive and, you know, living a life
No,
that I've
absolutely.
chosen to.
No, absolutely. But again, and like, I feel like I'm going to push my narrative a bit harder here, but like for me, anyway, like I'm going to talk personally here, right? I looked at that and I looked, okay, well, should I go that route? Should I learn traditional and this and that? But I think there's ways that you can learn traditional without having to go to uni. Like, for example, something which I'm starting to do now and starting to move on to now is to bring on, be brought on to more traditional sets, you know, in the respective film sets or whatever. And you know, there's been opportunities and things for me to film behind the scenes for other people and people who are further ahead in their career than me, and also, you know, even something simple like this podcast has allowed me to really have a platform to talk to people who are further ahead in their career. So it might be they're further ahead in their YouTube career, they're further ahead in their filmmaking career, they're further ahead in their education, they're further ahead in whatever, right? But you know, and then moving forward, and allow me to sort of pick that brain and pick and choose what information I need or what information is valuable, as well. So I think, like, my only advice, like, quote unquote, my only advice would be, I completely understand why you want to go to uni, but my only advice personally would be give it some time, and I think you'll find that you can probably learn the same things from a different route without having the financial deficit that happens with uni. Or you may not. As I say, it depends. It's a very personal decision. But for me personally, I looked at it from a perspective of, okay, I'm going to spend all this time going to uni, doing this, doing that. But I'm actually going to spend maybe 10 to 20% of the actual time at uni actually doing the bits I actually want there to learn, right? When I can not do that, and I can spend 70 to 90% of my time learning, creating, building a brand and a business that I can live off. You know, I can create a career from, hopefully.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did. And when I realized that, I was like, well, okay, well, there's always online courses. There's always things and that, because I think there's always a benefit to have a structured form of education that you can use as a tool, right? But I don't think that education necessarily has to be correlated with or connected to a brick and mortar style education for some people. Again, it comes back to, I think for me anyway, the concept of, are you self-motivated, and will you get up and do what you have to do, or get up and try and optimize your time, and get up and create, and get up and do what you know, whatever it is, or not. You know, some people need that structure. They need that other thing to be like, right, at this time, at this day, I have this class, so I have to go there and do this and this and this, blah 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 blah. Right, but for me, after leaving college, you know, for me, and the main thing I took from college, which was important, because in the last year of college, you're getting development anyway, you're given a 6 month. The last 6 months is basically a final major project, right? And you're basically told, right, now you've got to go do this project. I'll see you in 6 months. That's it. And most people go, what? What? Hold on. Wait, what do you mean? And the main point of that is to teach you a work ethic and teach you how to break a project down into small, manageable chunks. You know, that's what I learned. And around the same time, you're also asked about uni, because you have to go through the UCAS process and all that, and etc. And for me, I took the work ethic from that 6 months and what I achieved in that 6 months, and I looked at it and went, if I did that across the next 2 years, I would achieve more than the first 2 years of uni.
I mean,
so for me,
you make very good points, and bringing it back to me being young again and being that sort of raw potential, I remain completely open to the fact that I could, in a year's time, in 2 days' time, change my mind. You know, I have made the decision based on the information that I have in the present. You know, like just from this conversation, I've been given information that I didn't have access to before, and that and other things may influence, you know, my decision making. I always try to keep open-minded approach when it comes to these things, to make sure that I'm not just blindly doing things because I think it's the next right thing. You know, I want to question it. But what you were talking about with the 6 months work yourself, that for me has been with the coronavirus. You know, it was coming up to the time in which it was final major project time, and they just sort of send you off to go create what it is you're going
hands
to.
off, you know, but bird needs to fly time.
Exactly. You know? And so I was starting that process anyway, and then COVID happened, and it was like, right, well, you're still going to carry on with your final major project, but you're not going to have access to any of the college equipment, the, you know, like the sort of one-to-ones with the lecturers and that sort of stuff. And it's this thing I've spoken about in a couple of my videos, is that adversity is a catalyst for change and for creative solutions. You know, this is a time in which creatives can either fall into a pit of despair and low motivation because their structure in their life is gone, or they can use the creative mind, which is such a gift, because I think most of us have suffered for, you know, to be able to develop a mind that thinks of creative solutions the way that we do. But you have the ability to adapt and change. So coronavirus happened, and I was like, right, forget the old idea. I've got to come up with something that fits the situation. And so I ended up, you know, creating the first episode of Quarantine Diaries, which was a a short video set to music, just looking at what life was like, you know, during lockdown in the UK. And there's always this flexibility that you have to maintain as a creator, in which you've got to be prepared. You can't be too attached to a project that you can't go, do you know what, that there's no audience for that, or there's, you know, this just doesn't make sense under current times. You've got to be able to adapt. And I think, you know, you spoke about with your next level coach about the importance of coaching and mentoring. I think most people forget that they have a choice. You know, most people, like I've mentioned before, sort of doing just doing what they think they should be doing rather than what they want. And it was like I for a brief time, when we went into lockdown, forgot that I had a choice over how I could experience that time. And for me, it was when I remembered that, no, hang on a sec, you know, I've still got a camera, or even if I didn't have a camera, I've still got a phone which takes video. I can still create, I can still connect with others. And it's the really important thing. And I think it ties into the university thing as well, that you've got a choice. You don't have to do something just because you think it's right, but you respond to the situation rather than just reacting to whatever comes along. You take in all the information, you work with others, get support, and then act on what you feel is right, rather than just, you know, just doing what you think is best.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that I was having a conversation with a friend of mine a couple of weeks back, and we were talking about every single decision you make in life has consequences and risk attached to it, right? Whether we're talking about in the middle of COVID, or in the middle of a pandemic, or in the middle of a war, or in the middle of just normal life, right? Me going out every day, there's a chance I could get hit by a bus, right? Or there's a chance I could catch a deadly virus or whatever, right? And, you know, you personally have to make the choice on whether you're willing to make the choice, and I'll quote from Molly's podcast here, to take that action, but then also be able to be okay with the you know, the things that happen because you took that specific action. So if it's, I'm gonna go and build this side hustle, and then the side hustle develops to a point where you think if you push a little bit harder by freeing up some time, you'll be able to actually make it a full-time thing, then, you know, there's a risk there, but you also need to be aware that, what, you know, and quoting another podcast previously that would have come out by now, you know, where I think it was Caroline that said it, where she said, you know, what is the opportunity choice of you not doing that thing? Right? How are you, like, people, when, like, a lot of people back in February, those who don't know, I went officially full time. I had been running Brunton Media for 2.5 years at that time, basically full time in respect to hours, but I was working similar hours to you, and I was basically running Brunton Media on the side, right? And it was building up to the point where I was like, even if this is 6 months and I don't make any money, and, you know, it was just the funnest 6 months of my life, I'm going to grow so much in this 6 months, it's so worth my time doing.
Exactly.
Right? And I won't be asking that question of, what if I had made that decision? What if I had done that? Right? And now, to be honest, even with everything that happened with the pandemic and everything else, because a lot of people have said, oh, this is the worst time for you, all this, and I went, actually, to be honest, everything fell into place nearly perfectly, for the respect to where I needed it to be and how I needed it to be, for me to be in a position where I had to decide from my mindset, going back to what you were talking about as well, about your mindset. I've been able to develop a stronger mindset now, because I'm having to still work out ways to pivot, or work out ways to adapt, or work out ways to still create and still be able to, you know, make money. Because at the end of the day, that's what you have to do. You know, but also to develop a legacy, and develop, you know, what I'm trying to build, and really ask myself, you know, I spent March, I don't know whether you listened to I want to say episode 3, I did a solo podcast basically talking about how my COVID experience was, or the start of COVID experience was, and March was pretty rough for me, and you know, it was mainly more of a time where I had to dig deep and ask myself, why am I waking up every day? Why am I doing what I do? Why? If I was getting paid nothing or I was getting paid millions, why am I doing it? What am I actually doing it for? Why am I doing it? And for me, I was like, well, because I love it, and I think well, I would hope anyway that I'm adding a lot of positivity into the world, and I'm helping a percentage of people. I can't say a number on who and how, but I hope that, and from what it sounds like from what you said earlier, that's true. So that's, you know, for me that's great to hear, but it's also a very nice validation to know that what the mantra I'm having in my head is actually correct, as well.
And I think you know, you've just mentioned how beginning sort of middle of March or whatever, you were struggling, and you were having to ask yourself, you know, that not the big questions, but you were having to question things. You were having to, and it's that level of, I think this really ties into how successful you're going to be, is how willing you are to ask yourself the difficult questions, how willing you are to have the difficult conversations, and as well as that, are you willing to, you know, reach out to a community? It doesn't have to be the local community in a sense of Salisbury. It could be Salisbury Indies, or, you know, like Salisbury cinematographers, or whatever, or even just a group of friends, and say, look, is anybody else feeling this way? And 9 times out of 10 you'll find out that, you know, people are also questioning why they're doing what they're doing at the moment, because in life, when something like this happens, it makes us stop. You know, so one of the people that I respect most, they always talk about, are we human beings or are we human doings? You know, are we constantly doing stuff to the point where we don't have time to question our motives, or are we being present in the moment? And you know, it's this thing around, we had to stop. Everybody had to stop. And that, what it sounds like, is that you and I had a bit of a similar experience, in that it gave us an opportunity to figure out, if rather than just going along blindly, really think about and figure out whether this was something that we wanted to pursue. Because, I mean, a global pandemic, you know, a lockdown, this is a point in history in which people will look back on, and, you know, like, for me personally, I've documented, you know, like, sort of encaptured that feeling. But as well as that, what did you do with your time when the world stopped? What did you do? Did you sit at home? Did you fall into the infinite scroll of social medias and YouTubes, and just wake up in the morning and waste time until it was time to go back to sleep again? Or did you do something? Did you dig deep and engage with the local community and try to build something out of the, you know? And it's the same thing again. It's the common themes of the mindset of, you know, solving the internal ambivalence and being, no, I'm going to do this. And it's not to say that ambivalence is a bad thing, and being unsure about things is a bad thing. It's actually fantastic, because, like I said, it's the opportunity to question and to figure out what you want. But yeah, it's one of those things where something comes along and you've got to decide how you're going to respond to it. You can either choose the path of, you know, of just floating along, or you can try and put your hands in the dirt and try and build something.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and I hate to do this because it gets very motivational speaker very quick, and I'm passionate about motivational speaking to an extent, and it's that's a topic for another day. But, you know, I think it's one of those things where it's, life is gonna, whatever happens, whether it's a pandemic, or whether it's you're made redundant, or whether it's you break up with your girlfriend, or whether a family member dies, or whatever it is, life is gonna beat you to your knees, and it's up to you whether you get up every time, right, or whether you stay there. And a thing I've sort of developed in my head has been, life's gonna beat you to your knees. Are you gonna beat it to its knees? Right? So every time it tries to punch you, are you going to punch back? And how are you going to punch back? Right? And part of the reason why this podcast, I think, will be successful and is becoming pretty successful, to be honest, you know, and because, and I'll go on to the metric of why I think it's successful in a moment, but is that it was one of the ways that I used COVID, and it's one of the ways and one of the things that I did in COVID that specifically allowed me to flex my muscles and creatively, one, and two, it was also a kind of, you know, a kind of FU to the world in the respect to, yeah, I can't do this thing right now, but FU, I'm going to do this thing instead. Right? And just building off the point, because I don't want to leave it unanswered, about why do I think this podcast is successful. And I hate saying that because it makes me think, oh, you're just an egotistical person, Colin. Nah, not really. It's not, it's far from where I want it to be. Right? I just want to make that very clear. One. Two, I was in a chat with a client a couple of weeks ago, and she just mentioned the podcast out of the blue, randomly. Didn't talk about it, didn't mention it. And the time when you have a piece of your content get mentioned or references to a piece of content like this is a key example, where someone else mentions a reference to a piece of your content that they've obviously consumed because it was engaging enough to want to consume, or I'm an interesting enough person to want to listen to, talk to for over an hour, multiple times a week, or whatever. Which I don't personally understand, but anyway, is a sign that you're onto something, right? It is a sign that you are creating something that's very valuable, and that can be a you know, add service or add some information or be helpful to someone who, you know, might be something simple like, oh, you were having a bad day, consuming a piece of my content made you smile, right? Or something more drastic like you hate your job and you may have had a lot of other thoughts about what you could do, what you wouldn't do, but consuming some of my content or consuming one piece of my content was the straw that broke the camel's back to push you to develop and actually execute and start executing on that idea, on that business, on that, I'm going to become a photographer, I'm going to become a fashion model, I'm going to become blah, 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 whatever it may be. You know, but I think it also goes back to what I was saying earlier about we all have choice, right? And that choice comes with consequences from making that choice, right? And every choice has a set of risk attached to it, right? But there's also and then you just have to weigh it up, right? If I make this choice, there'll be possibly these consequences, and there's this risk attached to whether it will do what I want it to do, right? And only you can choose whether that decision is actually going to be one you're willing to make at the time you're wanting to, or at the time you're thinking of making it.
But it's, you know, it's also one of the most beneficial things that can happen is to be prepared to live with the consequences of your actions. You know, every day that I post something on social media, I'm dealing with the self-doubt of, oh, it's not doing as well as others, and, you know, all that sort of stuff. And then I say to myself, no, it's not about that. It's not about that. It's about me doing this. And I'm prepared, if you like, to go through the daily sort of cycle of self-doubt over sharing my work with people, because I'm doing it in a pursuit of a larger goal. It's not about the now. You know, I think I mentioned it earlier. I am prepared to sacrifice the now to get the future that I want. I'm prepared to put up with self-doubt in the present, you know, if that leads to success in the future. I'm prepared to live with the consequences of my decisions. And it's a strength that's very rarely talked about. And I think it's, you know, I think it's going to be important in, you know, the business aspect of Salisbury trying to get back to its feet and all that sort of stuff. People are going to have to make tough decisions and also commit to their decisions. And I think you and I are, at least for the moment anyway, are two examples of how committing to your decisions has worked out in a positive way. You know, I remember the job that you were working in. One time I saw you leaving the building and you had a Manfrotto tripod in your bag. And I thought, this is before I even knew of your company. And I was thinking, what the hell is that man doing with that? And I had tripod envy. And I felt very emasculated because I've got an off-brand tripod and it's not the same. But you know, it's you made a decision. You thought, you know what? I'll give it 6 months. I'm going to give it a go. You know, it takes a certain strength of character that I think comes a little bit more naturally maybe to creatives, but to go, I'm prepared to risk the now. I'm prepared to sacrifice. Yeah, I might not have as much money coming in the present, but there's the potential to develop something in the future. And it's yeah.
No, absolutely, and it was more. I think, you know, what I was going back to a little bit earlier about, you know, when I made that decision. For a year, I was thinking I should make that decision. I should make that decision. I should make that decision. I said, you know, a year beforehand, right, at this date, at this time, if things are the same, you are going to resign, right? And I don't know whether you've watched the video where I made about me going full-time specifically, but that was one of the hardest videos. Like, it's an easy video to make. It's the easiest, probably one of the easiest vlogs you could ever make in your entire life. It's literally, I'm going to go print a piece of paper, I'm going to go film me talking about the piece of paper, handing in a piece of paper, and then filming how I feel about me handing in that piece of paper, right? But it was one of those difficult vlogs I've ever had to make, period. Like, to this day now, and also previously. And it was because of how much emotional decision making went into that. But I think for me, with the power of hindsight, you know, 4.5 months on, it's now probably the best decision I ever made. Even if I have to go and get a part-time in the next 2-3 months, right? Hopefully I won't, but say I have to.
But you're prepared to do so.
That decision that I made back in February was still the best decision at that time, right? Even with the pandemic, even with everything, because the amount I have grown, just from a sheer numbers perspective, from a branding perspective, and also me personally, has been ridiculous, in my opinion, right? The person I am now is a very, very, very different person to the person I was in February, right? And the only reason why that is because I pushed myself outside of my comfort zone and put myself in a genuine risky situation, right? It was a calculated risk, but still a risk, right? In the respect to, there was some definite risk involved, and there still is definite risk involved. You know, my only source of income is what I can make through either affiliated business or business, right? I don't have another job, right? My job is to create content in one way or another, right? There's other ways to make revenue through content, which is an entire conversation on its own. But you know, it's those things where only a certain number of people, and I hope that my story will help some people. I'm sure you'll be in a position at some point as well, where they will feel in some ways the confidence that, like, even just from a community perspective of, there's a community around me, especially in Salisbury, that will support me in that decision and will support me in the hard times that will come, right? In me making the decision for me to leave a part-time, or me leaving a full-time, or me changing careers, or me trying to go out on my own, right? And I hope that if you make that decision at any point, that you would hopefully, in some ways at least, feel that my story was part of that decision-making process, because you've watched me do it and some of the struggles that I've gone through, to hopefully be able to learn from those.
I mean, there's a quote, and I can't remember the exact wording, but it says, if you wish to know the road ahead, ask those traveling back along it. You know, saying 6 months to a year's time, I'm struggling to decide whether to leave my current job for in the pursuit of something better, and I'm not sure, and I'm sort of unsure of whether or not I want to leave my comfort zone. The value of having an example of somebody doing that and then them being able to say, and I'm okay, is massive. It's the difference between content for content's sake and meaningful content. You know, you mentioned earlier, how am I adding value? Sharing your experience, and the hope and the strength that you learned from these decisions has more value, you know, than somebody reviewing the 250D, say, because it's showing people, it's leading by example, but also not in a way in which, you know, you mentioned earlier that you fear being perceived as egotistical or a narcissist. Nobody's looking up to you thinking, you know, oh, he's a deity, he's amazing. Being able to show vulnerability and show humility, especially on the internet, is respected as something different. It's not people responding to an ego. It's somebody responding to an aspect of humanity and part of the human struggle. And I think that that's really key. And I think that, you know, you made a sacrifice. You sacrificed in February. You decided to sacrifice the now in pursuit of something better. And you can say that no matter what, you're happy with that decision. And you can share that with other people, which might encourage them to potentially do the same thing, or might give them a bit of hope and support in their journeys. And it's so valuable. It's so valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. And by no means does that mean that there isn't days where I really question it, and there isn't days where I'm like, especially when money gets tight, or you know, I know that there's payments coming out, and work's been slow, where I'm like, was this a really shit idea? Why did I think this was a good idea again? And there's still stress and there's still worries, and you know, but the part of the reason I think more than ever is the about why, you know, I specifically care or specifically is because it's not just about making money for me, right? Like my business and my brand and what Brunton Media is becoming and will hopefully continue to become is more of me. It's me, and it's because people go, you know, a lot of business gurus or whatever, you know, people have said to me, oh, your brand's too personal, it's too this, too that, you know, you'll never be able to sell it. I'm like, I will never want to sell it, right? It's my last name. Right? Like, hold on. It's my last name, right? And the thing is, and the thing that they don't understand, and you know, Tommy talks about this in his podcast as well. I'm building, like, outside of making the ends meet money, I'm trying to build a legacy for my kids or my family or whoever to follow and to look and to. So say, for example, if I died tomorrow, God forbid I won't, right? Not planning to, just to be clear, right? But say God forbid that happened, right? My family could still live through my content and see what I was like. And for example, say I have kids and I die in a horrible accident in like 50 years or whatever, right? They'll ask me and go, what were you like at 20? What were you like at 22? What were you like at 23? What did you do during lockdown? Right, going back to your question from earlier, what did you do during COVID's lockdown in 2020? And I'll be able to go, well, if you look from here to here, this is all the content I produced during that period, during that month, right? And because of how, especially the podcast, it's a note by note by note by note comparison of how I feel at the time, right? Now, I might go over some topics again and again and again, but how I go over them and the input I give on them, I imagine, I don't know because I don't sit there and listen to my own podcast, but I imagine that they would have changed, right? Like, I imagine that if I'm, so for example, if I re-interview Dave, you know, you talked about him earlier, now, I'm sure that interview will be very, very different. And I'm sure there will be people who I have had on who I will bring back on. Or they may ask to come back on, because of updates in their life, because of things they want to talk about, things they didn't think they covered, things that have changed in their life and their perspective has changed, and things like that. So I think it's very interesting and very important to understand that there's a lot of reasons about why people may do something, and it's not just always financial. Sometimes it's a lot bigger than that, and sometimes it can be legacy related, or and to quote Tommy's speech, though, if you haven't seen it, I can link you afterwards. It's a very, very good TED talk that a guy called Tommy Gentleman did. Lovely bloke. Anyway, he talks about what is legacy. Legacy is a point where you die once physically, and then you die when someone doesn't say your name. For example, I would argue William Shakespeare and people like that still haven't died. We're still using it. We're still studying him. We're still looking at what he did in his life. And how long has he not been alive for?
Well, yeah, they did something which benefited us to this day. They left an imprint, an impact, not because they wanted to be remembered for their name. That same thing again. Not because they wanted their ego to forever be stroked, but they wanted to do what they cared about, and as a result of them making the sacrifices, living with the ramifications of their decisions, all in the pursuit of them, expressing themselves in the truest form that they could, they are still remembered to this day. It's not about like how amazing you think you are or anything like that. And I get the sense from what you're saying that you feel the same way, that it's more about when all is said and done, what did you do during the lockdown? What did you do with your life? Did you spend it making safe choices? Or did you take risks? Did you try and actively pursue something which would make you feel good? You want to be able to say at the end of the day that you're happy with the decisions that you've made, and that there isn't that one thing that you always regret.
Yeah, no, it's also about not having regret, but also about being proud of what you did, right? Because I'm sure I'll have conversations in the next couple of months with, how did you find lockdown? When we go into this new normal, or when we go, even in a couple of years, when we go back to normal, there'll be conversations about COVID's lockdown for decades to
Absolutely.
Come. And I'll be able to say, I am overly proud with what I was able to achieve during lockdown, right? I know, and I'm not saying this again to like boost up my ego, but I know no one else locally, or even arguably, I would say like within the UK, at least in my circles, that has been able to achieve anything that I've been able to achieve during lockdown, in the respect to the amount of content, the things I've launching, the things I'm planning to launch, the things I've worked on, etc. And I'm starting to reap the rewards of the things I did at the start of lockdown now. Right, like the things I started doing at the start of lockdown and the start of the year, I'm starting to reap the rewards of now, and we're 6 months on.
And I think that's an incredible point. I much in the same way I'm not trying to say this to be egotistical, but I am also proud of the work that I produced, because I saw that a lot of people couldn't motivate themselves enough to do it, and it shows a strength or a resource within myself that I'm not only proud to possess, but also very grateful to possess, that I did something with my time. And it once again, it makes me feel good, and it makes me feel like I have purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. But I just want to, and I promise this, and we will wrap up soon, because I know that I'm pushed for time a little bit, but I also don't want it to come across as if you didn't use lockdown as effectively as much, because you're going to beat yourself up anyway, right?
Oh yeah.
If you didn't do that, I don't want it to come across as, oh, you should have done what I've done. Don't compare yourself to what I've done, different. or etc. Right? You need to be okay with what you did, and if you didn't do as well as you thought you did, that's okay, right? But then say, okay, from this day forward, right? I'm going to do as best as I can. I'm going to try and do this. I'm going to try and do that. I'll give you a real example. As I say, March was kind of rough for me in the respect to lockdown specifically. I said from the 1st of April, you're back to work. Don't care how you feel. Don't care how you wake up. Whether you have however you feel, you are back to work 1st of April. That's it. Simple as that. Didn't have any excuses. Didn't have anything like that. 1st of April came around. I started back working.
Yeah.
I had no clue what I was going to do, what I was going to work on, but I said, you are back at work. I'll give you to the end of the month, right? I give myself the end of the month to be like, oh, the world's shit, whatever, right? That's fine, right? That's fine. Have that time. Enjoy it, right? Where you don't do enough and this and that, motivation takes forever. But getting myself out of that hole took me a week and a half, right? But I said the first step in me getting myself out of that hole was on the 1st of April, you're going to go back to work. I don't care what you do for work, but you're going to go back for work. You're going to go back to work. I forget what I even did, but
it led you to where you are now.
Setting that line, and it was the same with like going back with how I made my resignation decision. I've been saying for years, I was like, well, I'll always keep pushing it. In 1 year from today, you will make that decision whether you're ready or not. So you better fucking be ready. Simple as that. Because the decision's going to happen either way, and it's about, for me, making those decisions and then working out how to execute on those is very important. And the sooner you do that, the sooner things will start be able to happen.
I think, you know, I'm conscious of you wrapping up soon, so I'll keep this brief. But I think like you said, you know, I don't want anybody to feel like they wasted their time, because no time is ever truly wasted. If they sat around doing nothing during lockdown, they can take their experiences moving forward and apply them in a positive way. If they don't like, you know, a way in which they behave, they can take that knowledge moving forward with a desire to improve on it. There's no wrong way of doing something, because really wrongs show you what's right. So it's you know, my housemate, he's actually just finished his dissertation. He's been writing about trauma and addiction, and he was talking about how, I wish I knew about this treatment model when I was writing it, because if I did, then it would be so much better. And I was saying to him, you know, but you can take that moving forward. You know, my first work is never going to be perfect. Everything that I've got on YouTube at the moment, I'm sure I might, like you, look back on in a year's time, you know, like review the first thing I ever did and go like, oh my, like but it's a progression. To be human is to grow.
It's rough doing that.
I know, but to be human is to evolve. You know, we've spent billions of years doing it, but we do it every day within our own lives. We learn what we can, and we try, and rather than spending your time looking back and wishing that you'd done things differently back then in a time that you had no power over to change, look forward and change what you do have power over to change, which is yourself in the here and now and moving into the future. And I think, yeah, I think this podcast is a really good way of exemplifying that. You know, you've committed, like you've said, you've started putting out more content, and I felt the emotion when the camera died as well. I know what it's like when when a trusty tool that has served you for a long time finally comes to its end. I remember my first camera, the Canon 10D. It kept coming up with the error 99 or like something like that, and it just progressively got to the point where I couldn't use it anymore. But it's an evolution. You know, we always move on to better things.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything that you specifically want to talk about, want to cover, want to go over? Just before we wrap up?
To be honest with you, I think it's something that you can never really plan for a podcast. You know, a podcast is an exploration of topics, and as a result, there's nothing that you can really hope to achieve, you know, because quite often it takes on a completely different shape than how you would have planned it out. The only thing I would say to anybody listening is just do whatever you're doing. You know, don't question yourself. Don't think, oh, are people going to judge me for this? Don't care about what people think. Just do what you're doing, improve, grow, follow that path, because that will make you feel better than listening to that voice that says, oh, I'm worried about what people are going to think of me. Because that voice will always be there, and you can choose whether you listen to it or you can try and move on with things. And also, thank you for having me on. As in, like, this is a pretty cool opportunity for me. I love talking, and quite often the people in my life,
how goes your light, mate?
Yeah, quite often the people in my life tend to burn out. You know, they tend to. They'll say to me, "Can you stop now?"
We'll be here forever. Yeah, we'll be here forever. We're two people who just talk forever. And just before we get like too off topic again, you know, just moving back a little bit to what you were saying about people's judgment. People are going to judge you whatever, right? Like people, you cannot control whether they judge you or not. You can only control how you are affected by their judgment.
Exactly.
Right. So something which I did very early on was, that's fine. You have your stupid opinion. It's still a stupid opinion, but you can have your stupid opinion. That's fine. I'm going to carry on doing this. You can worry about why I'm doing it and burn up more of your time while I'm pushing forward, while you're standing still.
It's Gogglebox.
Right.
It's Gogglebox. You know, like there are the people who are sat on the sofa judging the people in the TV. Well, you can be the person in the TV who's actually doing stuff. You know, which one would you rather be?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you are currently the person who's goggleboxing, it's still never too late to become the person who's on the TV. Of course not. You're just starting. You just need to work harder than the other people because you're starting behind those people who've been doing it for longer, right? So you've in theory always got catching up to do.
You'll always be behind somebody.
Yeah, exactly. And also try to compare yourself on where you were, not where someone else was.
Yeah, compare and despair.
Cool. Let's end it off with, I think anyway, where can people find you? Those who have got this far into the podcast and would be interested in seeing more of your things and stuff. And of course, I'll drop links affiliated to you in the description down below and also in the post when it goes.
I mean, it's always like a little badge of honor to make it to the end of a podcast because it's a commitment. So well done if you've made it this far. But yeah, I'm on Instagram at Snowythedogphotography. I've just recently changed my YouTube name to the same thing, so you should be able to find me on both things. It's just Snowythedogphotography. I'm always the guy in the Nike hat or in a cap in town with a camera, you know, going about places. And you know, feel free to come up and chat to me if you want. I'm always, like I said, I'm always happy to talk and to share my experience on things. And I might be at the start of my journey, but like you, I'm just going to keep sharing that and trying to always reflect and grow from it. So just follow the journey because I'm right at the beginning. So just I invite anybody who's listening to follow the journey because hopefully in 3 years time, you know, I'll be making some really awesome content and it will be influenced by the stuff I'm doing right now.
Absolutely. Okay, I think we'll end it off there, but thank you so much for coming on and taking the time to talk to high heaven to me. As I say, we're one in the same in the respect to we can talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. But sometimes people who even should talk and talk and talk should stop and reflect at times as well. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on, and I'll keep you posted on when this one's going out. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen, and I hopefully enjoy mine and Sam's discussion. So yeah, that is going to wrap it up for today's podcast, ladies and gents. If you did enjoy this video, make sure to leave it with a like. I will of course leave Sam's links in the description down below or on the post if you're on Facebook. And thank you so much for joining me once again this week. And if you would like to not miss next week's episode of the podcast, then make sure to be subscribed to the channel, and I will see you very, very soon.